Hello team, welcome back to the channel. Feliz Navidad. We are coming up to Christmas. Weather's muck outside, depths of winter, not really conducive to doing much filming on the bank at the minute and not really getting out that much anyway. So with a few shopping days of Christmas left, I thought I'd continue the theme of the tackle shed on the channel and concentrate this time round on reels. Coarse fishing reels specifically. I want to talk about the different types. There's a vast array. You go into your local tackle shop, you look at the shelves, all sorts of makes, models, sizes. You know, what's the difference between them? Well, for the type of fishing that I do, which is commercial venues with the odd natural venue, a little bit of waggler fishing, short range feeder fishing, method feeder fishing. You don't really need a huge array of sizes. It ultimately boils down to sort of personal preference. So I'm going to talk you through the different styles that you might see and almost like the different evolution of my choices as time's gone by. So let's take a little bit of a closer look. I've got a few in front of me here and take it from there. Right, let's kick off here with two very similar reels, one a little bit more modern than the other, but made from Abu Garcia. It's a 506M. It's probably older than me. I think my uncle gave me this a long time ago. And then a more modern version. These are what we describe as closed-faced reels. So essentially, you can't see the line because it's encased in this face here. And the benefit of these reels, particularly when fishing rivers, is that when you're trotting a stick flow or a waggler, the line peels off the enclosed spool, and if it's a breezy day and the wind's blowing back here, there's nothing really to trap it on. There's no bail arm or anything where the line can sort of get encased. The reason why I use these less and less now, firstly, when I kicked off with this original 506, the drag system, which and for those new to fishing with reels, the drag is the resistance the reel offers when you're playing a fish. You can make it a little bit more sensitive and decrease the drag so the line peels off easier when the fish makes a run, or you can tighten up the plus and tighten that resistance up so the fish is fighting a bit harder. But of course you've got to have balanced tackle when you're playing the fish on the drag, and it's not very sensitive on what would be probably a 40+ year old reel. That's why I went for a more modern version, the 506 Mark II. It is a more sensitive drag, and also it's got a good anti-reverse. So if I just pop this down, so the way that a closed face reel works, of course you're going to wind the handle forward like you would do on any other reel, but the spool of line is encased in this fascia here, and what happens is there's a small pin that you can see. When you wind, that pin picks up the line and reels it in, and when you're going to cast, you press the button and that disengages the line, and then you can cast. You would put that back on. Just get that right. You would press the button, make the cast, the line would peel off, and then you engage the pin again just by winding the reel, and you're set. And as I say, the drag was a lot better, more sensitive, and the anti-reverse, which means the handles. Some people prefer to play the fish by what's called back winding. So rather using the drag and the settings to dictate how much line and resistance is offered, you would flick off the anti-reverse, which is just on here on this, and you would allow the fish to run by back winding, and that releases line. I don't like playing fish on a back wind. I like to use a drag, so that's why I wanted a good drag system. But again, over time I've seen less and less benefits using a closed face reel on the rivers, so don't tend to use them. So this is probably I don't know, this model might be 20 years old. This model would be 40+ years old. The principle is exactly the same. The pin, you take that fascia off as well, and that's how the spool is released. So you can load your spool up. They don't take much line, about 100 meters of 2-pound line on one of these, but great for trotting. Like I say, on windy days, but probably a little bit antiquated nowadays. So they are closed face reels. They do have some advantages, but they're certainly not as in vogue as they were probably going back now to the 90s when closed face reels were used a lot. Next up, we move on to a reel that I was desperate for as a youngster. Again, sort of mid to late 90s, when I was moving away from closed face reels, fishing more still waters, wanted to get a longer cast, and this is a Daiwa TD1 350DM. For those of you that are a bit of a retro angler, you would recognize these. Fantastic reel. There was also the Harrier version, well, a Harrier model, which is very similar, with a rear drag where you had a dab bail arm. So this is the bail arm system. You open that up, to which allows the line to release and then cast. But on the dab system, you'd press the bail arm and a spring would open it, and you could then feed the line off if you was trotting, etc. So this is what you would call an open faced reel, because there's nothing encasing the line. It's a bail arm action rather than a pin that winds the line onto the spool. The drag is at the rear, which allows you again to dictate the resistance that line is pulled off, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. And the anti-reverse, very simple. That's that little flick switch there, which allows the reel to be back wound. So this was the creme de la creme really back in the day. I'd probably go back to about 94, 95, I reckon. These were some of the best reels available at the time. A couple of things to think about when we start talking about, I guess, what are more popular now as in open face reels, is you'll see lots of markings and writing, and some of it almost doesn't mean anything. So let's look at some of the wording here. First of all, here it says 3 ball bearings. Well, essentially, the more ball bearings the reel has inside the mechanism, the more smoother the retrieve will be. So when you are winding, you're going to get a nice smooth action. Now this has only got 3 ball bearings, but it's still a very, very smooth operation. Again, the bail arm connects perfectly. It's very, it's even now, and this, say it's a reel of 30 odd years old, this is still a very nice piece of fishing kit. Along the side here as well, it will talk about speeds. So you'll see this, or gear ratio will be the wording that's used on a lot of reels. Now the ratio of this one here, bear in mind this is a 30 odd year old reel, is 6:1, which means for every revolution or every turn of the handle from start to finish, that bail arm will revolve around the spool 6.2 times. So 6.6.2.1, that's 6.2 times. That bail arm will revolve around the spool with 1 full turn of the handle. Hopefully that makes sense. So the higher the number, the faster the speed. Now that's not always a good thing, especially if you are fishing at long distance. If you're retrieving back too fast, that can cause spin-ups and can cause issues with your terminal tackle. You might want something a little bit more slow, which then gives you more sort of, if you think like pulling a caravan on a car, you would use torque. Essentially, it's similar with a reel. You want a bit more torque and less speed for when you're fishing long distances and perhaps catching bigger fish. So don't be too blinded by the gear ratio. So this reel, 3 ball bearings, 6.2.1. Something else to watch out for, just disengage you just press a button in the middle there, that takes off the spool. When you look at the spool, they usually, as I did on the last video, when we were speaking about various sort of lines, and also almost like diameters, on here this reel will take 200 meters of 2 kilo line. So i.e. 4 pound line, you'll get 200 meters on there. So it gives you a bit of an idea. So the writing on the spool normally tells you about how much line to put on. One tip when you're using these, let's call them an open face reel or a fixed spool reel essentially, and it's fixed because when it's on there, it's not going anywhere. It's the bail arm that's doing all the work, it's not the spool. when you're using a fixed spool reel, always good practice to have the line up to the lip of the spool, but not too much that the line then cascades off and spills off. You still got to be you know, up to the lip to make casting easier, but don't have too much on that it spills off. So again, this reel will be 30 odd years old. It's a rear drag. I don't use this that often because I now prefer a front drag. So if we come a lot more modern, this isn't a particularly expensive reel, Shimano Katana, about £35. But what you'll notice, which is quite interesting on this, is there isn't a button to take the spool off. I had to unwind this, but this cog here, or this device, is also the drag. So I mentioned before about what is drag. Well, essentially, just make sure you can see that properly. I'm just going to put the line and gauge it underneath the bail arm, so you can see it there. Now when you pull, the fish pulls the line, that resistance is dictated by how tight or loose I use this device here. So if I go clockwise, it tightens up. Go anti-clockwise, loosens off. So I like to play fish on the front drag, so when I'm playing the fish I can just, one or two little tweaks just sort of dictates how much resistance is put against the fish. And I've moved completely away from rear drag reels. Also, why I like this Katana is that there is no anti-reverse. I cannot backwind on this. The handle just literally does not go back at all. And that's because it's a front drag, no anti-reverse reel. So I can only play on the drag, and that's what I prefer. So that's why I bought these reels. I've got no choice. I've not got the chance of me hitting the anti-reverse by accident and ended up having the handle spinning backwards. It's never going to happen. It's all played on the drag. So not a particularly expensive model, but one that I found really useful and I quite like. Now another thing with this, and you'll see on more modern reels, they will be denominated in sizes. So if I bring that up towards the camera, that is that's a 3000 size. So they'll normally start around 1000, then 2500, 3000, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc, etc. And that is a bigger reel, bigger spool capacity, probably a different gear ratio, etc, etc. Now for standard coarse fishing, as I described at the start, 3000 will be a pretty average size for general coarse work. So fishing a waggler, pellet waggler, stick float, small feeders. The average size, as I spoke before about gear ratio, on average 5.2.1, so 5.2 revolutions of the bail arm per every turn of the handle is about standard for most basic coarse fixed spool reels. So that's fairly average. 3000 probably the most used size for me personally. We can then move over to another style of reel, which would be, and it's generally called a bait runner. So what's the difference? Well, you've got the rear drag, just the same as the old Daiwa one that we spoke about. You've got your anti-reverse, which is underneath there. There's a little switch that allows you to backwind, but you've also got this device here. Well, that allows this spool to run completely free whilst being, and the gear ratio there actually out of interest is 5.1.1, so 5.1 revolutions of the bail arm for every full turn of the reel handle. Now this device here allows what's called a free spool action. So if I've put that under, again I'll just engage that underneath the bail arm as if I was fishing. So that would be a standard drag, and that's dictated by the rear drag just there. But if I'm casting out a lead into a river or into a lake and I don't want my rod being dragged in by a large fish, I set what we call the free spool feature just here. So if I flick that on, that'll allow me to put my rod down, and if the fish took my bait and shot off, the spool will run very, very freely, and if I caught that on the camera, very, very freely until I engage that at the back, and then it kicks in to the standard rear drag setting. So when people are using sort of bite alarms and buzzers, etc., they would cast out, tighten up, engage the free spool motion, and if a fish shoots off, the bite alarm engages, you then flick to engage, strike, and then you would play the fish on the standard rear or front drag depending on the reel. This is only a small bait runner reel because I'm not doing big pit fishing or anything. It's only a 3,500 size, but it's handy on a river, fishing for sort of chub or barbel at short distances. So that would be a bait runner or free spool reel, which are readily available and quite versatile as well, especially if you're fishing ledgering, you know, feeder fishing. And then finally we come up to probably more of a high-end general purpose fixed spool reel. So this is a Daiwa TDX. I've had this numerous years now. It's probably a model that must be 10 years old, but very, very smooth action, very strong cranking power, and a little tip there as well, I use a little label maker just to put on the strength of line of each spool. Again, this is one of those where I can just press the button and change the spool if required. But yeah, this type of device, you can see 7 ball bearings, so it's a super smooth retrieve, pretty much standard sort of line lay, and you can see how I've gone right up to the edge of the lip, but I've not gone overboard where the line is cascading and spilling off the spool. It's really important. Don't put too much on, but do not put too little on as well. I don't know what the gear ratio of this is in terms of its retrieve, but I know it's very, very balanced. I've never had spin ups, I've never had any issues with this. I use this for mainly pellet waggler fishing actually, because you're doing a lot of casting and retrieving. You need something smooth, you need something that's not going to sort of let you down. Casting out perhaps a 5 to 10 gram pellet waggler a reel can take a bit of punishment, as can your rod, which is why there's dedicated pellet waggler rods, but you need a good reel as well. Again, that's a 3,000 size, pretty average. And as I said, they do step up. I'll just show you. So there's a marked difference between the two, as you can see, 3,000 and 4,000. It's probably a third bigger, which obviously means that you get a bigger spool, which can hold more line. There's just that bit of extra cranking power. So a 4,000 I would generally use for casting a larger, perhaps a method feeder or looking at further distances. And then I would even step up to a 5,000 specifically when I'm fishing on a river or casting in excess of around sort of 50 meters, 60 yards or so. There are 5,000 sizes that I use as well, but that's it. My smallest is 2,500 size, which I use on a small 9-foot bomb rod, right up to a 5,000 that I'd use on a 12 or 13-foot feeder rod. But general purpose, something like a 3,000. It doesn't have to be expensive, but good quality. You'll notice as well, notwithstanding the Abu and the Coarse free spool reel, you'll notice the other two were Daiwa or Shimano. I'm a big believer that Japanese reels are absolutely built to last, and have been sort of standing the test of time. Shimano and Daiwa have been making reels since God was a boy, and that'll do for me. There's nothing better. There's no testimony better than time spent. So there we go, Tim. Quick overview of the reels that I've used over the years and used today, from small sizes up to larger. So if you are in the market for a new reel this Christmas, or you're dropping hints to the other half to get you one, the only advice I could give would be that get a brand that is well known, stood the test of time, as I've just mentioned, but also if you can get a spare spool, that's really handy and useful, because I mentioned on the last video, 4 and 6 pound generally covers my fishing. I've got a couple of spools of 8 pound on as well for those longer casts or whatever, but it's just dead easy then. When the seasons change, you need to scale down, just pop the spool off, put the lighter line on for winter, and then you're good to go, and then change over again in spring. So if you can get a reel with a spare spool, but I think now for between £30 and £60, you'll get yourself a really good fixed spool reel that will last you in good stead. So cheers for watching. Hopefully that's been useful. And if I don't see you before, have a great Christmas and see you in 2025.